Welcome to the Institute for Post-American Studies.
Greetings, and welcome to the Institute for Post-American Studies with your host, me, Sol. Broadcasting not live at all from the northeastern quadrant of the so-called United States. Today, I got my good friend Mckenzie Wark coming on to talk about her new book, Capitalism is Dead, or Is This Something Worse?, out now on Verso. And in this conversation, we're just going to be kind of talking about the pandemic and how the nature of capitalism and our economy has changed in this new digital hellscape. Before we get into that interview, let's hear from some homies in the Channel Zero Podcast Network. And thanks for listening. And if you are so bold as to want to support this project financially, you can go to patreon.com/SOLEONE and sign up there.
Silver Threads, Still Walking, Still Waking is co-hosted by me, Carla Bergman.
And me, Eleanor Goldfield. This is where we interview long-term organizers and radicals about their watershed moments, what they've learned along the way, and how they maintain their hope on this path. Dreaming and building emergent worlds for a present and future anchored in justice and freedom for all.
Because there are forks in the road, but they all lead us home, to the fight, to the build.
Mckenzie Wark, how are you living?
Hi.
How's it going?
I'm good. I honestly can't complain, Yeah, I endure.
It's awesome. A lot has changed for you. We've spoken a couple, numerous times over the years. And today, as I talk to you, you have transitioned away from being a dude into a woman. So congratulations.
Yeah. I've spoken to you since.
Yeah. I just remember there was like an announcement you were going on sabbatical, and then, then all of a sudden, I always noticed on your Facebook it was always she. So I don't, obviously this wasn't a surprise to you.
Yeah, I didn't know why I did that, but I kind of like transitioned my Facebook name before anything else. That's Facebook gender.
That's awesome. And I don't know. I was as I was like preparing for this interview, I really enjoyed the interview you did with Natasha Leonard, and when she was talking to you about transitioning, you were saying how it sort of marks an end of a certain kind of writing and period for you, and like begins a new chapter of thinking and writing, or I don't know. Is that how you're thinking about it? Or?
Yeah, I in a lot of ways, Capital is Dead sums up what I've been working on for 20 years. I was reading it a bit last night, and I'm like, who the fuck wrote this? Like, I stand by it, but it's like, wow, I can't write like that anymore. That really was when I knew what that argument was and how to make it. And I feel like I'm trying to do something different now, and I don't have that facility. And also, like, if you change the hormones your brain runs on, then your brain runs differently, and it's like, I'm not used to how this one runs yet.
Wow, really? That's cool. That's hacking.
Yeah, I think like a lot of cis women get that because, and a lot of people might remember this from puberty, like your brain just suddenly starts working differently, I don't want to be reductive about it because there's a lot more involved, and you process that through your social role and everything, but it's definitely a thing.
Wow. I mean, is there something you can point to that you're like, it's different?
I really can't read theory books at the moment. Reading fiction. And it sounds like some sort of gendered cliche, but on some level that's true. It's like 2018 I was on leave and I could really just focus on this stuff, and now I'm teaching and stuff. and like I don't think anybody's brain has worked very well for the last year. So like there's a lot of other factors involved. I find finding two brain cells to rub together is like a good morning.
I bring it up. I brought it up on like 10 other podcasts, but I was reading something. I always do this, but it's like I feel like it's the best summation of 2020 is like 50 years compressed into one. It's like we're locked in our house, like forced to confront our demons. And someone, I think it was a French philosopher on Ill Will Editions, talking about how we're all in Moses's walk, maybe come out on the other end.
Yeah, I mean that really depends who you are. I live in northern Queens, which was the first epicenter of COVID in New York City, because it's full of service workers. Like it's mostly Colombian and South Asian, and it got really hit really hard because people are living 10 to an apartment, and like working in grocery stores and delivery and stuff like that. So I feel like what do I have to fucking complain about? It's kind of sucked being like trapped in the house with the kids all the time, but I'm safe. So I kind of feel on the one hand it's been a really fucking hard year, but I'm alive and healthy, and it really wasn't the worst way to ride it out at all.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I smoked a lot of weed last year, so I can't tell if I had brain fog from COVID or other things. But it was I don't know. Maybe I was just tired from changing diapers.
Doing it again, it's like, oh yeah, you can just think and feel in a whole other register for a while, and it feels great the day after, but I really can't do anything at all.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's because I don't smoke much now, and every time I do, it's like the next day I feel very slow. So it's good to be back on the decaf tea. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, I've sort of I don't know if I told you, but I've changed my podcast theme, and I'm kind of just, I don't know, I just want to go more deep on theory stuff, but also looking at how I kind of stop doing music and other things with the podcast and just focusing more on the stuff I'm deeply moved by on whatever ideas. And so it's always I'm always oh, I'm doing episode 50, Mckenzie Wark. And so here I am at, episode 0. I'm like, all right, I got to bring in Wark. And as I was, like I said earlier, it wasn't really even about this book that I wanted to talk to you, but, reading this book, it is like a distillation of, all your books that I've read. It's a distill. It's like the period at the end of these ideas about the hacker class, the vectoral class. I don't know. Do you is postmodernism still a thing, or is it just modernism now?
It got very uncool to talk about it because it was all the rage, kind of in the 80s when I was coming up. And like a lot of these terms, they get diffused into. I remember doing keyword searches on postmodern, back in the 90s, and it's wait, it's been used to advertise shoes and stuff now. It ceases, concepts they lose their sharpness, they lose their edge.
Right.
But it was a moment of thinking, because it's the word itself, postmodern, is a little paradox, right? Because the modern is always different to itself, it's always new, it's always self-differentiating. So what could be after that? So is there novelty of a different kind? I think that's the sort of question that the concept posed. But not a word that you kind of can use in polite company anymore. Everybody from the old days was like, oh God.
Yeah.
We survived years of discourse about that, give us a break.
But I still I because Debord, the situationist, that kind of stuff is sort of what framed my anarchism from an early, whatever, when I was reading that stuff. That's just the word that I think about. But yeah, it doesn't even make sense. But so, I guess my basic question to start is how has capitalism changed? I mean, your book basically says that, the old thinking about class relations of like workers and ruling class and capitalists and renters or whatever. There's new things that have been tacked on to capitalism.
So the first thing is a lot of the world is still capitalism, right? But maybe not all of it. And it never was all of it. There was always another kind of ruling class. There was always a landlord class. There were always tenant farmers. There used to be a slave mode of production. Like, you really can't talk about America without talking about it being founded on two modes of production, right? Capitalism based on free labor in the North, and the slave mode of production based on slave labor in the South. So, we've got to get used to there being multiple modes of production. And capitalism is still what a lot of people are in. But what if there was a new one on top that had figured out how to exploit the other modes of production? Like, that was sort of the question I was asking in Hacker Manifesto in 2004, and I sort of revisit that and update it a little bit in Capital is Dead. So, what if, and there's a way in which Technics plays a role in this, that capitalism is able to take off and become dominant because of new forces of production that enabled a kind of mobilization of resources in a way that was sort of more abstract from the old, like landlord-based economy or the slave-based economy in the South. So it wasn't based on owning land anymore. You just just buy some land and set up a factory. It could be anywhere. But what if there's a next sort of Technics-driven stage of abstraction, which is, rather than control everything through controlling factories means production, you control everything through controlling the production of information. Information's a relatively new thing, like the word is old, but we've really only had a science of it since the 1940s. I guess a relatively new kind of techniques in the world. And what if that had enabled a ruling class to control the value chain through the ownership and control of information? So that would give you a new kind of dominant class. And maybe what we think of as big corporations had migrated to control through that, or new corporations had arisen. Like, both those things happen if you look at, say, the Fortune 500 in the States. And then what if there's a new kind of subordinate class? Like, what does it mean to be an information worker, where it's different to factory work. Like, you make different shit all the time. Like, it only has value if it has novelty. That's a really strange kind of job to do. So what if we thought of all of the people who do that, whose job is to make new information, as belonging to a class, rather than thinking of ourselves as so separate all the time? Like, people in the sciences and the arts, for example, don't think they're doing the same thing, but we sort of are. Like, it all ends up being turned into patents and copyrights and trademarks and all that stuff.
So let me cut you off. So when you're talking about, this class, which you kind of called the hacker class, but you don't really care if we call it that anymore. That's what you're saying, that like creatives, like musicians, poets, scientists, people who aren't like working with their hands, they're all part of this class, the information class.
And maybe you can call it digital labor now, as opposed to analog labor. That doesn't really quite capture all of it, but something like that. Yeah, maybe it's a different kind of job, because it's the forms of domination and control over it are a little different to how you control factory work. Because like the same methods don't work. Like, you can't really, like keep people on. Like, you can't speed up the factory line and get art out the other end of it, or even get science out the other end of it. Like sometimes it takes its own speed.
Right.
So the means of control are actually a little different. And the way that what that builds in the end is a kind of information infrastructure that enmeshes everybody else as well. Like, we're all kind of building this thing that we don't have any control over at all. Our labor gets all sucked into it to kind of like build out an information infrastructure that becomes the means of domination and control for all subordinate classes, and also for fractions of the ruling class. Like, there's a way in which capital isn't dominant anymore. Like, it kind of sucks to actually own a factory.
Right.
It's better if you own the patents. Like, Apple doesn't make a single goddamn phone, right? You outsource all that stuff.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm real, like, I don't know, I'm really into, I guess, the sort of invisible committee kind of communization kind of ideas about infrastructure being, really important. But one of the things, you talk about is how there's like this vectoral class. I don't know if you're wedded to that term anymore either, but this like vectoral class who, organizes infrastructure. And, like they're not producing anything, and they're the ones who, who are getting like the richest. And I'm wondering, I don't know if you're a fan of Negri. I know a lot of people like used to like Negri and don't anymore, but I'm wondering if his idea of how empire, fits this. Like I often think about the idea of empire, like we construct empire through our actions, but you've talked about how we're being conditioned to work all the time. Like when we're on Facebook, we're working. When we're home, we're constantly working, whether or not we're part of the information class, hacker class, or not. We're always working, and in doing so, we're like constructing empire through our fingertips, basically. Like, are you?
That's good. Yeah, I mean the organized working class, when there still was such a thing in the overdeveloped world, what it was able to extract from capital was free time. And that's the 8-hour day, right? So if I'm only working for 8 hours, then I need 8 hours rest, and 8 hours is my time. And capital moved into that free time and commodified it by creating leisure industries, right? By creating culture industry. But what we have now is something different, which is that it's able to extract value out of our non-work as well as out of our work. Like, you're working for the boss when you're on Facebook, and when you're, like, data is being extracted out of you according to how you interact with Netflix, Like, there's a way in which all of your time becomes a kind of generator of surplus information that you don't control. That ruling class, I call vectorless class, call it what you like, right? But it's controlled through control of the information vector in all of its forms, including stocks and flows of information. I put a bit too much emphasis on sort of trademark and copyright back in Hacker Manifesto, but I think ownership of the vector itself and of logistics, supply chains, big data, AI, all those things sort of appeared on the horizon in the 20 years since I started doing this. Yeah, so that's where we are. I liked an earlier Negri a lot better than the later books, and Negri was really, because he was trying to, he's so directly involved in struggles in Italy and trying to figure out, like, there's a different kind of worker. Like he was so focused on the composition of the working class, and it's like, what is immaterial labor? I thought it was not a good term, and what is cognitive labor? These were the things they started thinking about, and I think there's reasons there's downsides to those terms, but they're trying to think exactly what I was going to call, hacker class. Like, what is this different kind of labor? Like, how do we organize that? How is it building out our political economy? What is what they called after Marx general intellect? A way in which commodification applies not just to sort of physical labor, but to the product of brains and feelings and soul and all that. That was the thing to figure out. And Negri, I think, was a little ahead of the curve with that. And the people around him, right? That was all part of a whole social movement.
Yeah, autonomia, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like
critique of all that, which is like, you all talked about like cognitive labor, but like you never talked about sex work. Like, what was up with that? Like the kind of emotional labor as well as cognitive and erotic labor is all in there as well, right? Like all those things are like everybody we know is doing all that stuff to survive now, right? So let's talk about all of the things that get commodified as information.
Yeah, I mean, me and my wife she was talking about John Lennon being accused of being a wife beater, and I was like, I've never heard that, but of course it doesn't surprise me. And it's like, almost 90% of the people or thinkers that we thought of as great, up until whatever 2015, would be, a lot of them would be, Me Too'd, because a lot of them are just shitty people on some level,
Yeah, right. I mean, nobody's exempt from how patriarchy works and all those things, including me. And it's. I think looking to writers to be saints is always going to disappoint you.
Right.
You know, artists are often kind of slightly weird people. You know, it's sort of part of the deal. Like, not always, right? But that's often just part of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, absolute power, corrupts. It's like, we've all, I don't know, in my early 20s, there's a lot of people who thought I was a fucking asshole, and I was. I probably
still happy to cop to. I do my best, honestly. I'm in therapy for it now.
I know. I was like, I've been like trying. I like that was my only thing this year. I was like, I'm going to get therapy this year finally, and I'm like, I'm still waiting on leads from this therapist and whatever. But speaking
do a whole new podcast series rather than go to therapy. I'm sorry, honey. I'm just
exactly.
When you're ready.
But the other thing about like when I was reading your book, you're talking about like the hacker class. And there was one part where you're talking about like the way the labor of creative people has changed dramatically. And when I compare like what my daily routine was, when I first started doing this 20 years ago, I'd put out a record independently, wouldn't even send out any promos. I'd sell, 10,000, 20,000, whatever, a lot of records, and I'd keep most of the profits, and I could just fucking live off that and then make a record every couple years. And there was like infrastructure, like magazines, and just a lot of it was shitty music industry politics, but like it still functioned. And now when I think about like the way I spend my time as an artist, and when I think about why I don't want to be an artist anymore, it's because so much of my time has fucking, when I'm doing art, it has nothing to do with art. It's like reformatting videos for YouTube and then getting it rejected and then having to put it back in and then like having to like delete the swear words out so I can run an ad on Facebook, and then just like all this like shitty like stuff that just fucking sucks the fun out of like making a music video at all. Like, and I just like I wish I had like, whatever, extracted the sentence, but you were talking in this book about just describing it so succinctly about how we're just essentially just being conditioned to work for tech companies now, and that's like so much of our effort and time really goes into that, like that fucking shitty bureaucracy basically. And I like
everybody gets to make their art now, but everybody is really just contributing to the greater glory of the platforms that own and control the vector underneath it. So like, and there is a, like the sort of pre-internet era had its downsides as well, for artists. But at least it was a known quantity at some point, and you could figure out how to navigate it because people had already made all the mistakes. Like if you were at all smart about it, you would go, "Oh, those guys got that contract, and it was so fucking terrible. They now owe money." on their work that was like famous and everybody bought, and they're not only broke, they're in debt. What the fuck happened? I'm not signing that. Yeah,
totally.
Because we know that's true, right? That happens so often. And they're like, oh wait, they put all these charges, against the royalty. You don't know what the charges were against you, on the balance sheet, et cetera, So you can sort of, at some point, it was sort of known. There's a famous case, I was in law school, a long time ago. There's a famous case called the Troggs case. Remember the Troggs? They had that hit Wild thing? Mm-hmm. They signed the contract, and it's a famous case because the judge got them out of it because the evidence that they were so fucking stupid that they were not mentally competent to sign the contract is the fact that they signed it. It's like the fact that you signed this is evidence enough that you were just such a fucking idiot that no one should have, without adult supervision, sort of let you do that, you know. So you sort of look back at that and you go, oh yeah, people figure that out. But now it's like, oh my God, everybody is just working their ass off and competing with everybody else, right, to try to have a creative life. And it's all just to the great glory of the platforms. They don't care. And then all of the mid-range artists have like dropped out. You know,
Right.
like there's still like superstars. You know, if you're Taylor Swift, it's probably better than it's ever been because you have access to kind of like a global industry that's all set up for you. But there's no mid-range, and then there's this, and everybody is you know, like making $3. So the sort of the mid-range went away when we did away with like the, you know, pop radio and the record store and bookstore and all that stuff, you know. Yeah, so it really kind of sucks to be on the qualitative end of producing information at the moment.
Yeah, and I can confirm that what you're saying is true as a lower mid-range artist. And, you know, and like, again, just to prove your argument or to like, you know, give an example of it, you know, I'm thinking of like Spotify and streaming platforms, and like a record label is like the traditional infrastructure, even if you're a DIY artist, like that you're like, you know, that people work their whole lives to build up this platform that is, you know, I can put out whatever I want and whatever. And then it's like, sure, you can put out whatever, you can still put out whatever you want, but like this algorithm is only going to, you know, show it to certain people, and you're only going to get fractions of pennies for it. And people don't buy records anymore. So fuck you. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I think like book trade ended up being the one to be in because people still buy physical books. Like it's, you know, like it's weird that no one did better than the actual old-fashioned 100-year-old book. You know, I couldn't live on book sales, and yeah, I'm definitely at the bottom end of the mid list. But you know, it's sort of like, you know, it's paying off the credit card.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm one of these people who's always collected books. I love books. I've never collected records. I don't know why. I like having books.
Yeah. It's like some confession, given that's what you do.
Hey, you know, whatever. I also download music, whatever.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
you know,
it's like a thing that happened when I transitioned was I went back to rave culture, and it's kind of like really interesting to me to see how that changed. And like the music is great, like I love it, and it's made possible by the CDJ and by a whole series of other like really portable, cheap technologies that didn't exist, you know, when the sort of Detroit guys were inventing this stuff, you know. But it's so hard for anybody to make a living, you know. It's just kind of ridiculous. And then of course the live venues just all went away in the last year. So it's kind of like I do like the forward-looking. Technology embracing side of culture, but let's not kid ourselves, there's anything great about it, you know, like you're just exploring possibilities in a technical space, trying to figure out what's aesthetically interesting and what's survivable.
You know, but one thing I will say about rave culture and like that underground, it is like an underground DIY sort of world, and that's what makes it awesome. What about this term, the precariat or precarity? Do you think that's a useful term? Precarity or
actually, there's a whole chapter in Capitalist Debt about theories of class. Guy Standing, I think, came up with that one. There's ways I think it's useful to talk about precarity as a kind of creeping kind of condition, and then all of the kind of anxiety and instability that comes with that. And the way that sort of ramifies through people's lives, yeah. And there's really been exposed in the last year how fucking precarious a lot of the United States was, and how little anybody is, as in the ruling class, had any interest in doing anything about it at all. So yeah, I think that term's really useful. One
of the things that you really go at in this book is like the idea of like, well, first of all, I had no idea that like so much of the Communist Manifesto was like détournement of other texts or whatever, and and just like, you know, how you kind of go after like how, I don't know, rigid or how like almost with like a religious fervor people carry on, treat Marx as like a religion, you know? And so sometimes when I get into it with Marxists, but also like labor focused anarchists, like the concept of the proletariat. And I'm like, I think the proletariat, like, it doesn't really exist. I think you're more likely to be a precariat now than a, you know, proletariat, because so many people aren't working in factories. And, you know, they argue, well, the proletariat is the precariat. Yeah, I don't know. So if you want to talk about, like, you know, this idea of like treating Marx as a religion, and how like the real Marxist thing to do is to, you know,
and you know, I was raised on all the, like, the, you know, pamphlet version of Marxism, where you break it down to concepts kind of thing, and you know, sort of materials design for worker education. Like, I read all that. That was my initial training. But I'm also a reader, and at some point you read Marx and you're like, wow, this guy can really write. And there's like all these different things going on. Like, there's like deep veins of really bitter satire going on. There's in-jokes. Like, there's détournement all through Marx, you know, where he's just like, you know, straight up ripping lines out of other writers and then twisting them a little bit. In the manifesto, not so much, but elsewhere, most definitely. And jokes people don't get anymore, where you need a little kind of context to figure out, you know, who he's like throwing shade at between the lines or whatever. Or, you know, like, there's some tweets all over Marx as well, right, to put it in 21st century terms. So I think to think of Marx also as a writer, and that writing is a weapon, you know, like to be able to play with form, to sort of try to get some wiggle room within the languages that are against you and that you're trying to work in and against. You know, there's something to be said for that, and a lot of capitalist debt is built on work of artists. You know, I talk about Asger Jorn and Pasolini. There's something very direct about Angela Davis's writing, but I love the book she did about Black blues women, where it's sort of touching on the necessity for that kind of aesthetic dimension. You know, I think that's her best book. So yeah, you know, I wanted to sort of resurrect that a little bit and bring together a sort of an aesthetic taste for modernism and a sort of political commitment to Marxism, but each helps you wear the other a bit lightly, to not be too invested in either in aesthetics or in sort of treating Marx as sort of like a sacred text or something. I don't think that's helpful.
Yeah. Well, and I'm wondering, like, you know, with, you know, this last year, you know, really like kind of drove home to me, like, you know, the album title Death Drive. I like cut that from like one of your tweets. You know, we were just like chatting or something.
T-shirt. That's how it works.
Exactly. And you know, it really felt like, you know, the death drive of our civilization is just like on just full display in 2020. And, you know, you've joked about like fanaticism and the worship of death or whatever as like a, you know, I don't know if it was a joke, but you've talked about that as being like, you know, maybe that's, you know, what we're seeing. And I mean, it certainly feels like that in 2020, doesn't it? It's like a deep nihilism.
Yeah, and we now have like a very clear image of, I mean, if you'd missed it before, the signs were already there, but how the ruling class is going to approach the disruption of ongoing, you know, climate crisis. Like, this is how they're going to respond. We're on our own. Yeah, that's really clear. And I think processing that and figuring out, okay, so, you know, that stuff anarchists always said about mutual aid, that turns out to be really important because it might be all we have at some level. There might be pieces of infrastructure, institution that are, you know, understand their mission as you know, sort of collective, but that's really not the vibe. Yeah, and it's like, not. If you're not, you know, a multimillionaire, at least you got to figure it out for yourself.
So is that really where, I mean, like when you're like, I mean, sometimes it's like I can't tell what I really think if I'm like, you know, like especially this year, it's like I have like such extreme thoughts of like, is our society collapsing, or is it just collapsing for a lot of people? You know, like I was talking with a friend from Crime Think last night, and he was saying, yeah, for 300,000 dead Americans, the collapse is already here. And but it's like sometimes it's hard to know like what's really happening. Like you say, mutual aid, that they're not coming to help us, and mutual aid is the future, and maybe taking even a step further and maybe going back to thinking about communes and like really meeting material needs on our own. And that's, there's a lot of communists also that are on that shit nowadays.
Yeah, and not to idealize it, because it's limited in scale, and you have all sorts of internal tensions when you actually do those things. So I don't mean this in an idealistic sense, but I think it's just very important to start, thinking about a thing that isn't even really politics, but is how you collectivize materiality and care. Yeah, that seems very important at the moment.
Yeah, and it's funny you say taking it out of politics. Like when I've met people, like specifically in Greece, who identify as autonomists, they hate politics, is what they say. They're like, take the politics out of it, just meet material needs, and that's one of the cool things about seeing mutual aid generalized. Like everybody, tons of people are doing it. It's not just some fringe thing.
Yeah, and one has to remember that Marxism isn't anti-politics at the end of the day, right? Like it's all about the thing that really matters is how things are produced. That you form a political party out of it is secondary to the struggle in the workplace, and I think Marx is their lead. Even or you can put them in parallel with the cooperative movement, with anarchist approach to mutual aid, to sort of the versions of self-management that come out of Black liberation, forms of collective care that came out of women's liberation, like on and on. You sort of go, oh yeah, like we all really should talk to each other about the things we do that are not really politics with a capital P, that are about kind of organizing care and material need. I think that's sort of maybe the agenda at the moment.
Yeah. Again, use capital letters. Like a lot of people are, talking about like small a anarchism in the same way. Well, just like to play devil's advocate or confused podcast host.
And it's funny, we were all honest that that's always the same thing.
White devil's advocate. At the same time, right? Like, again, it just shows you how, like, again, maybe we really are beyond capitalism here. They at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, a whole bunch of people were just bawling because, they couldn't work. And then all of a sudden they're getting unemployment plus an extra $600 for a while. And for a lot of people, like, that's more money than, they ever got. And so, like, on one hand, it just showed like the fucking ludicrousness of like the way that economics work, the way that money can just be invented, and then you do that, it stimulates the economy, things keep moving. And so, like, on one hand, it like proved that like doing that shit could work, and it could possibly, like, save capitalism or save the system, but keep things moving, and keep people comfortable. But then at the same time, at least the people who were put on unemployment, and then in the same breath, they just like took it all away with no warning and just left all those people to eat shit. And there's just all those tensions with how the unemployment has rolled out. And I just feel like the only way the system can like retain any kind of legitimacy is by like, I don't know, I guess I'm just hoping, but like rolling out universal basic income on some level, but it just doesn't seem like that's like they would do that. But.
Yeah, that's a bit of a double-edged sword, because I think the danger with that is, like, here's a handful of cash, but we're going to take away all of the social services you used to get. So go buy the equivalent of that on a quote-unquote free market. So I think you sort of need to defend, that kind of social access at the same time as like, well, the fuck, do we just pay everybody to live? And then if you want to live well, it's on top of that, then go look for a job and stuff. Because there was a weird moment, wasn't it, when everybody got the stimulus check. And a lot of people, some people really struggled to get it too, to actually even get it in your bank account. But yeah, there was just like one little moment when everybody that the networks I know were like, so we can actually buy the groceries in advance and then like deliver them to people who are stuck at home. Oh, sweet. Like that would be kind of great. Or, like no one is using all this DJ equipment. So why don't we just like do a show in a parking lot? Like there was just this sense of possibility in the middle of disaster. And it's not to negate, like so many people were dying. I heard the sirens and the ambulances go constantly because we're a block away from a hospital. But there's also this sense of we're going to make a life like in the middle of this. And that to me was really something. And I think the thing to not lose is that sense. If we can sort of struggle to achieve the means to live, we can really do something with that.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a I actually got to miss all of that. So while everybody was, between struggling and like fucking dying, and it was a crazy year. But it's just like when you look at the tensions that brought about. You have like these small business owners who, couldn't stay open, and so they became anti-mask activists. I mean, it's just so absurd when you think about like what has played out and all the tensions that are like, rising in our society. And it's
yeah, I mean, like a lot of the people I know these days are trans women, and they're working in bars or they're doing sex work. Like all of it involved personal service of one sort or another, and all that went away, So, and then there was this like glorious moment where at least you got a check and you could stay alive, and then that's gone, But yeah, it's like it could easily have been solved with just like the things that seemed so important for the last, 6-7 months are just clearly not in terms of everyday people's lives. I mean, every Tuesday there's a line around the block I live on for a food bank run by one of those evangelical churches, and the lines got shorter, not because there's less need, but they just have less to give away,
Jeez.
They give everyone a number line, and it doesn't get around because they don't have it anymore. So it's like, what the fuck is everybody doing,
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm always following what the folks at 1882 Woodbine are doing in New York, and it seems like just people who do mutual aid, or like they've gone from like, handing out a few potatoes to like, having like warehouses full of shit, from diapers to, and it's really
yeah. Because clearly, like it's not about biopower. Like the state does not give a rat's ass about 99% of the population. It's about extracting value out of populations, and out of the policing of those populations, which is now also a business. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy that New York City and state are so unbelievably broke at the moment, and just even cutting the budget of the police department is not really on the table. They reduce, as far as I understand it, they reduced the amount by which they increased it. Like that was the upshot of all of those struggles. And it's like, oh, okay, that's the real priority here.
Another thing you talk about in this book is like the relationship between like landlords, or like when landlords and like the tension or whatever between landlords and farmers. And this is just an anecdote or whatever, but I just like, it's like that's what I'm trying to do now, basically, is be a farmer. And so I just thought it was like interesting to see it. To just, see that word in your book. I didn't expect to see you like talking about, I mean, I guess it makes sense when you're talking about the evolution of capitalism and everything, but it just like,
well, it's a particular
to
reading
think of that,
right?
To think of that as a way out, basically. To me, I think of it, how do I get out of capitalism? Go be a farmer. in it. I'm not going to escape.
Yeah, well, and it's a lot of people are doing that. There's a kind of interesting movement back to that because there's this whole like brain drain out of the country where young people just didn't get to stay. And so much of agriculture is owned by really big landowners, right, who use migrant labor. They still support fucking Trump, even though Trump was making it hard for them to get labor. Like, how does that even work? And it's kind of like you can't take for granted that the massive infrastructure that all of this runs on is gonna like hold together. Through climate disruption. And so maybe it's not a bad thing to start thinking about, all right, what's a lighter, more flexible, more robust, sort of way to sort of network the material production of need, and to sort of start with that, maybe that's not a bad thing at all.
It's certainly fun. Certainly fun.
It's totally outside my wheelhouse. I have like no. my ancestors left the farm like at least 200 years ago. No fucking.
Yeah, your family are like coal miners or something, right? Is that how I
No, that showed up in some interview, and I'm like in the header to an interview, and we were never coal miners. My ancestors were mechanics, and then they're in the gasworks business. For many, that's why they went to Australia, to fucking steal other people's land, but to do gasworks, when that was before electricity, that's how you got lighting. It was gasworks. And they did that, So the Warks have been technical for a long time, but have been urban for back to the late 1700s.
That's awesome. Warkers. Well, I guess my last question, about your book, I guess, would be, since you've written this book, is there any way that people have like engaged with it that has like really piqued your interest, or like big takeaways from the book that have like, confirmed what you were saying maybe in this past year that we haven't covered in the course of this conversation?
My favorite thing that came out of it, which I highly recommend, is an album by Bergsonist and Speaker Music, which is DeForest Brown Jr., I think, who uses a few different names. I think it's a Speaker Music that's called Sublime Language of My Century. And I'm like, that's just great. I just love it. It's like, someone took this book and turned it into beats, So that's my favorite kind of reaction to it. And it's like, since I transitioned, like there's a level of no longer being taken seriously that happened, which I actually kind of welcome, because it means like I get patronized by bearded Marxists rather than yelled at, which is just adorable. Wow. Have a book tour. They're like, have you heard of this person called Althusser? And I'm like, yeah, I've been teaching that for 20 years, honey.
Oh my God, that's fucked.
Oh, I get interviews with fashion magazines now, and sometimes that comes with swag,
Nice.
I will take gifts. I have no shame. So yeah, and it's sort of, I really love it when it circulates among the people that it's about as a kind of class of worker. Yeah, like that I really love, like people who work in tech, like land on this book and go, oh, yeah, this sort of makes sense, like that I really kind of appreciate when artists pick it up. That I kind of love. And that's sort of like, it did well, like it still circulates, it's going in paperback. So yeah, I kind of meant it to be, readable that way, and it kind of is. And yeah, that I kind of like.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, like I definitely felt called out when reading this stuff about the hacker class, and I just have never really, I know I said this before, but it was like really like sometimes I just like think I think too much or whatever, and I'm like, I need to just stop taking I take my job for granted. But then reading that, I was like, yeah, like this is a thing. Like, fuck this shit. Like, I don't know. Is there a way out? Like, is there like, people grappling with these issues? Do you have like advice for people grappling with this stuff, or like ways for people to like maybe like productively like resist it or something? I mean, do we have to now? Are we supposed to become like a radical vectoral class of our
organize? Like the answer is always to organize. Yeah. it's really cheering to see tech workers mobilized just in the last 3 to 4 years. That was really something. And question the terms under which they're bought off. That's been really encouraging. So I hope it's a kind of discipline. Yeah, like who said that? Is that Angela Davis again? I'm not sure who I'm sort of detouring with that one, and I'm not good at it. But yeah, I think you have to sort of like practice that tactical sense of with whom do you organize and how for the maintenance of the possibility of the conditions of life.
Yeah, and maybe that organizing, it could mean at a workplace, but it could also mean organizing for other things as well.
I mean, the other thing I'd say about that is like one of the mood of the book is very much got to do with defeat, the defeat of all of the versions of radicalism in the 20th century, like all of us fucking lost. But the benefit of that is that we really did not have to have these factional fight conversations anymore, where the Council Communists won't talk to the DSA who are electoralists and all that. And it's like all of these things fucking didn't work, right? So why are we thinking that somebody's got the correct theory about this? It's like we could really just bracket that off. And you can disagree, but we don't need to, make it all we do is sort of talk about how we do it when nothing ever actually succeeded in the long run, and we were defeated. And I am from the sort of a section of the workers' movement that knows that, that actually had power and was defeated a few times. So yeah, that sensibility, I think, on the one hand, it seems depressing. It's a book about defeat. On the other hand, it's like, oh, thank God we don't have to fight have the Trotskyists versus the, Council Communists versus the mutual aid anarchists versus, just don't fucking bother with that, yeah?
Yeah, just find out what we can do together,
right?
How we can build our power, and
because politics, at the end, the politics part of it does tend to be about unlikely alliances at the end of the day, where you're able to bracket that stuff off. It's the lesson of how Lenin pulled off the October Revolution. Is like, let's side with the peasants. This is absolutely heretical. In the short run, it worked.
Some of the there's been a real resurgence of black anarchism over the last year, and some of the I don't even remember exactly who said it, but it's basically maybe the end result of what we're doing isn't even anarchism, but it's something else. And I think that goes for everyone and everything. It's whatever sort of power can be, achieved together, and whatever throw away. It's like that. What was that movement? Up against the wall, motherfuckers. Take the best. Yeah. Take the best. Leave the rest. Huh?
Ben Murray is still around. I hope he's still around. He's a super interesting character.
Oh, do you know that person?
Yeah. I met Ben, and then Ben was looking for somebody to write a book about him, which wasn't going to be me, But yeah, he was at the center of that. Somebody got killed, it got heavy, and he fled to New Mexico and got involved in indigenous stuff. And that's how he makes his living, is trading in beads and things like that now. The last time I saw him, super interesting character, and I really wish somebody would tell the Ben Murray story.
I don't know shit about that person. Maybe I'll put him on my list of people to reach out to, and
Oh yeah, talk to Ben. I think he has a website with his email on it still. If he's I hope and pray he's still with us.
That's awesome. I fucking. You ever been to New Mexico?
I only as a tourist. I don't know it at all.
It's Taos, New Mexico is such a subtle, cool, beautiful place. Especially those Earth ships. If you're ever taking a vacation, you want to go to Tatooine or whatever the desert planet. It's one of the only places in the United States where you're I don't know.
Whenever I'm in the South. It feels so much like Australia in so many ways, because I'm this is like a desert ecology, and white people came and fucked it up. completely didn't understand shit about water, about land, and obviously erased all the people who did it to the extent that they could. And thank God they failed at doing that. But it's so familiar to me. It's like everything you brought from a wet climate is not going to work here.
Yeah, I don't know if you followed this Make Rojava Green Again project where they're kind of terraforming Rojava. They're planting 1 million olive trees and doing all this cool stuff. So, I mean, it'd be interesting to see remediation projects happening like that in the Southwest. Maybe get an extra 100 years out of human living out of some of these places.
Yeah. There are people who knew how to do it, I went to a really interesting site that Pueblo Indians had lived in, quote unquote, around that, right? Because that's what they're called there at the site. But yeah, people had lived there for some hundreds of years and then just left, and nobody knows why. I'm like, that's just such a fascinating story. But there's this whole way of life based on just being in the shadow of the cliff along the river. There's a whole way of life that you could sustain there for a really long period of time. And and then you look at what's there now, and you're like, oh, this is based on massive amounts of electricity and air conditioning and motor vehicles, and none of this can last.
Maybe this is the aliens come down and just say, you know what, y'all. You can't have this shit. You gotta go back to the caves. We're taking this.
There's a really great text where he just basically wants to be a traitor to the human species, to the aliens in advance. It makes himself Henry Flint.
Oh, nice.
Henry Flint was one of the founders of Fluxus, really super interesting, original thinker and musician. And he has a website too with a bunch of stuff on it, possibly including that text. He changes it all the time. But I love that of I want to be a traitor to humanity. Sign me up.
Yeah, I mean that's dark, but I get the sentiment. That's for sure. Especially honestly, especially after this year, I'm just what the fuck? How can people be so fucked up? I really can't wrap my head around the brutality that I've witnessed in the last year, and it's really just laid bare any. I don't know. I think we're all still processing it, really.
I do have a bit of a part of me came out of the Sydney libertarians, and the libertarian in the left-wing sense, not the right-wing sense, but they were a little bit unique and incredibly pessimistic about the possibilities of humans. A lot of anarchism rests on optimism about humans, and I just could never share that, frankly. But the Sydney school was we're completely fucked, but we can still do a lot better than this.
Yeah, well, you might as well, whatever. Go down, loving and trying. What are you,
exactly.
What are you working on? What are you working on next? What kind of projects you got coming up?
I honestly don't know. I finished 4 books in 2018 when I was on leave. And I have a book about Kathy Acker coming out in the fall. I don't know what I'm doing after that.
Nice.
It's just maybe I don't need to write a book every other fucking year anymore.
Right. I mean, shit, if it's not a major source of income, I don't see why. If you don't, it's like being a Quaker, only speak when you're moved,
Right. Yeah, it was dissociation. I was so dissociated. The transition fixed a bit of that. So, I don't know. I'm proud of the books I've written.
I'm proud of them, too. They've been a big influence on me. I've just, it's been cool knowing you all these years, and I'm always really grateful of, friendships with people like you who have been, I don't know, kind of not mentorish, but kind of people that have been patient with me and cool. And I've just loved engaging with your work over the years. And thank you for putting all this awesome work out and coming on this, not the Soulcast, what was once called the Soulcast, which is now the Institute for Post-American Studies.
I love that.
Thanks for listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to support it by hopping over to patreon.com/SOLEONE. Peace.